She said it with the same tone you'd use to introduce someone's emotional support ferret. "This is my sister's husband," she announced into the mic, mid-toast. "He's between things, a bit of an unemployed nobody." Then she laughed. Her laugh was always too loud, like she was trying to make sure people knew it was a joke even if they didn't get it. That's the thing with her. If she's not getting attention, she'll burn the closest person just to warm the crowd. Laughter rolled across the reception hall like spilled champagne, polite, brittle, the kind of laugh people use when they aren't sure who they're allowed to offend. I just smiled, small, tight, the kind of smile that fits in a pocket. I wasn't going to clap back in front of her boss. Not yet. He stood next to her, holding a glass of Brut and wearing a face like he'd just stepped out of a stock photo called Executive Success. Blue suit, gold cufflinks, tired eyes. She beamed at him like a rescued puppy trying to impress its new owner. "This is Mr. Whitaker," she said. "My boss at Lankwell and Grant. Senior VP of—" "Interesting," he interrupted, eyeing me with a faint flicker of recognition. "We'll talk later." I tilted my head. "Sure," I said. "As long as it's not about employment, I'm clearly a nobody." She laughed again, sharper this time. He didn't, and here's where it started to shift. Just slightly, like a floorboard creaking under too much weight. Quick note, since you're here, if you've made it this far, and you're part of the 97% who read without subscribing, maybe hit that button. It's free, keeps the lights on, and yeah, motivates the team behind these stories to keep digging deeper, sharper, better. Thanks for that. Back to the wedding. It was held at the Breyer House, some vineyard/mansion hybrid with white roses climbing every surface like they were paid to be there. The kind of place where forks are made of silver, but the people holding them think decanting is a personality trait. My wife looked at me from across the table, quiet, beautiful, embarrassed. She gave a small wince when her sister made the remark, but she didn't say anything. She never did, not with her. She and I had a rule: let the storm pass, then rebuild the fence. As for the rest of her family, they smiled nervously, like they wanted to laugh but weren't sure if it was okay. No one stood up for me. Again, not surprising. They treat me like some pet turtle their daughter found during a storm. Odd, quiet, possibly useful, but mostly just there. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask, is that I used to sit at tables where mergers were whispered over wine that cost more than this entire floral budget. That before I stepped back to take care of my father-in-law during his decline, before I moved to this town of brunch menus and fake civility, my calendar was blocked 6 months out by CEOs who needed one thing: me. But my sister-in-law, she wouldn't know strategic discretion if it bit her clipboard. She once bragged that she got promoted because she outlasted 3 managers and slept only with coffee. She thinks she's clever, but clever's loud, smart moves quietly. So I sat there in my 2-in-charcoal suit, not the $1,200 one that still hangs in my old closet. I let her laugh, let them smirk, let the word nobody echo off the chandeliers. Because I know something about silence. It makes people underestimate you, makes them sloppy, loud, exposed. Mr. Whitaker didn't laugh. He just looked at me for a second too long, like a man watching a familiar shadow on a wall and trying to remember where he'd seen it move before. Then he smiled, but not at her. At me, and I smiled back, quiet, steady. This time, it was the kind that doesn't fit in a pocket. 5 years ago, I was on a panel in Singapore, standing between a Saudi oil magnate and a woman who owned the 3rd largest logistics firm in Europe. The moderator asked, "What's the single most critical factor in a leadership transition?" I said, "Ego. If it walks into the room first, nothing else fits." The audience laughed. They always did, not because I was funny, but because the truth, when wrapped in a suit and said quietly enough, sounds charming. Back then, I was the guy executives called when they knew they were about to be gutted. I didn't save jobs. I saved legacies. CEOs don't fear firing. They fear irrelevance. I helped them exit with grace, restructure with minimal blood, and whisper their replacements into position without shaking investor confidence. I wasn't the face on the website. I was the shadow behind the glass. And then my wife's father collapsed in a parking lot. Heart quick, brutal. He lived but never really came back. My wife wanted to move closer, help her mom, slow life down. So I resigned my contracts, canceled 2 speaking engagements, and told my assistant to scrub my digital footprint down to academic citations. We moved to a small, aggressively beige town where the biggest business scandal was whether the bakery stole its scone recipe from Pinterest. I didn't mind. I could finally breathe without calendar alerts. But some names don't vanish. They just go silent. 2 years ago, a board member from Lankwell and Grant emailed me from a Proton Mail account. Heard you're off the grid. We're reviewing executive structure. Quiet eyes only. Interested? That's how it started, a quarterly retainer. No public link. My name never entered a memo. My reports were sent directly to the chair and 3 select board members. I reviewed their second-tier executives, flagged middle management issues, and more recently recommended a replacement for their aging COO, the CEO, Whitaker. He used to take notes in my seminars with a pencil that cost more than a car payment. Once asked me post-session if he had the emotional elasticity for C-level politics. I told him to stop using words like that if he wanted the job. He listened. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law clawed her way up Lankwell's ranks like a cat on a marble floor. Her talent wasn't in leadership, it was in optics. She knew how to look like she belonged in charge. Buzzwords, performative grind culture, wearing stress like a badge, and stepping on people when no one important was looking. When her name first appeared on the org chart in my reports, I remember pausing. It felt inconvenient. I flagged her behavior anyway. She created noise where there should be clarity, inflated results, blurred lines between initiative and insubordination. One department had an attrition rate 3 times higher under her tenure. Her superior logged a formal complaint that she circumvented him on a pitch, not malicious, just slippery. I noted it all. I didn't mention we were related. I didn't need to. The data was damning on its own. And still she bragged at family dinners about crushing deliverables, about leading with intuition, about being unafraid to challenge the old guard. She once said the CEO told her she had real disruptor energy. Sure, earthquakes are disruptive too. She never asked what I used to do, never wondered how I paid for our home outright, or why I never seemed worried about retirement. She thought I was between things. Because I didn't wear it on my sleeve, it didn't exist to her. But I was still advising her company, still shaping it brick by brick. And the foundation she was building her little empire on, I'd already marked it for demolition. She called it weaponized charisma. That's what she told my wife one night after 2 glasses of Pinot and exactly 1 compliment too many about her own reflection in the hallway mirror. I figured out how to play them, she said, curling up on our couch like she owned it. You smile just enough, interrupt just enough, and cry only once a year, publicly. People think you're a fighter and a team player. That's how you win. My wife laughed politely, poured more wine. I kept reading quietly across the room, feigning interest in a novel I'd already read twice. What I wanted to say was, if you have to explain your chess strategy, you're not playing chess, you're playing yourself. At work, they called her the fixer, which is corporate speak for the person who volunteers for bloodletting when HR won't. She prided herself on firing people with a smile and a "this will open a door for you." She said her team respected her because she kept it real. What they really respected was her ability to get promoted without taking any blame. That's not management. That's a magic trick performed with other people's jobs. I watched her climb, and I said nothing. Meanwhile, I was getting quiet pings from the Lankwell board's back channel. Encrypted, brief, surgical. Board wants to move up timeline. Recommendation finalized. I replied, yes, confirm at end of quarter. No signature, no pleasantries. Our entire exchange over the past year could fit on a single sheet of paper. That's how the real decisions get made, not in conference rooms, but in shadows. The closer you are to power, the less you need to shout. She wouldn't understand that. She'd built her entire identity around being the loudest, competent person in a room full of nervous men, and it worked for a while. A month before the wedding, she sent out a LinkedIn post that read like a self-authored obituary. After 4 years of learning, growth, and bold decisions, I'm proud to announce I've been promoted to head of client strategy at Lankwell and Grant. Never be afraid to take up space. It got 211 likes. I read it while planting tomatoes. That same morning, I received an updated dossier. The CEO's executive transition was complete. The COO had formally retired. The board had approved my recommendations. One of them included a full leadership audit starting with mid-level roles showing high turnover. Guess who lit up like a flare in those analytics? She told my wife over brunch that she was essential now, that Whitaker said she had boardroom potential. I made sure that it's easier to remove someone from high up, makes the fall longer. She thought she was manipulating everyone like chess pieces. The irony? She was already on the board, just not the kind she imagined. I wasn't just watching her rise, I was marking the altitude for when the air would run out. She hosted the pre-wedding dinner like she was chairing a gala for herself. Everything was curated, candlelight that flickered just enough to look spontaneous, a menu that name-dropped ingredients more than dishes, baby fennel and black garlic foam, and a playlist that screamed, "I once dated a guy who owned vinyls." She had place cards, of course. God forbid people choose their own seats. Mine was buried at the far end of the long table, next to the florist and the photographer's assistant, neither of whom she'd bother remembering by dessert. My wife gave me a look across the table that said, just let her have her moment. But that moment had turned into a performance, and the audience was getting tired. The first comment came before the appetizers were cleared. I made a casual observation about the wine, just something light, and she immediately said, "Oh, I forgot. You're a connoisseur now. Didn't realize unemployment pairs well with Merlot." Polite chuckles, mostly from people who didn't know better. She corrected me mid-sentence when I mentioned the difference between revenue growth and margin expansion. "Pretty sure that's not how it works, babe," she said, not even looking up from her fork. "Don't worry, I'll tutor you after the honeymoon," then winked at the table like she was doing charity. Again, laughter. Forced. Her fiancé smiled nervously and took a sip of water like he wished it was gin. I didn't respond, I watched, because the louder she got, the more obvious it became she needed control, not just over the narrative, but over the temperature of the room, the pace of the conversation, the exact frequency of applause. When the server hesitated before serving the next course, she clicked her fingers, actually clicked, and said, "Let's not take forever, hun. We're on a timeline here." That moment stuck with me. The click, the performative smile, the forced charm of someone who saw waitstaff as scenery. She was so obsessed with upward optics that she forgot people notice how you treat those beneath you, especially the ones quietly watching from the edge of the table. Halfway through the main course, some foam-covered thing that didn't know if it was meat or art, Mr. Whitaker finally arrived. No entrance announcement, no dramatic greeting. He slipped in with a nod to the room and took the seat she'd obviously saved beside herself, the seat that used to be mine at family gatherings before she promoted herself to VIP status. She stood to greet him like a cruise director welcoming royalty. "You made it," she beamed, leaning in for a kiss on the cheek that lingered just a second too long. "Everyone, this is Mr. Whitaker, Senior VP at Lankwell, and honestly the reason I'm standing here today." He smiled politely, said a few restrained hellos. Then he saw me, and something flickered in his face, just a blink, like when a camera adjusts to light. He stepped past her extended arm, walked over, and said quietly, "I thought your name sounded familiar." I met his gaze. "We'll catch up after the ceremony," I said. Nothing more. He held eye contact, nodded. I'd like that. That was it, that small beat, barely a breath. But she noticed. She saw him walk to me first. And though she masked it with laughter and a refill of wine, I could see her calculating. A slight tilt of her head. The first moment of unease, like a dancer missing a step but smiling through it. The rest of the dinner, she tried harder, louder jokes, bigger laughs, longer stories with more names dropped than points made, but I stayed quiet. Let her stack the performance higher and higher, watched it sway under its own weight, because the higher the tower, the louder the crash. The morning of the wedding smelled like burnt toast and jasmine shampoo. My wife was half-dressed, padding barefoot around the kitchen in a robe that still had a dry cleaner tag tucked under one sleeve, trying to balance her phone between shoulder and cheek while hunting for her heels like they owed her money. She was distracted, beautiful, and oblivious to the war about to start in her sister's perfect little kingdom. I sat at the table with black coffee and a newspaper I wasn't reading. "Do you think your sister actually enjoys putting people down?" I asked softly, eyes still fixed on the same paragraph for the third time. She paused mid-step. "Where's this coming from?" "Dinner party last week. The wine didn't hide it. The way she talks to people. Staff, family, me." She sighed, rubbing her temple with the back of her hand. "She's always been like that. It's how she stays afloat. Keep others beneath her so she never feels small. And that doesn't bother you?" She looked at me then. Tired, exasperated, but loving. It bothers me, but it doesn't have to bother you today. Please let her have her moment. Just get through it. I nodded. Today might be important. She squinted at me. Important how? I smiled faintly. We'll see. 10 minutes later, after she left to pick up her dress, my phone rang. No caller ID, just static silence before a voice said, "Confirming that Mr. Whitaker will deliver the decision personally?" "Yes," I replied. During the reception, click. No goodbyes in that world, only confirmations. I sat still for a long moment, staring at the fruit bowl. One overripe banana was collapsing under its own sugar. For some reason, I fixated on that. How rot doesn't scream, it just spreads. I had submitted my final recommendation to the board 2 weeks prior. 3 executives marked for reassignment, 1 flagged for potential litigation risk due to internal climate issues. Her name, highlighted in quiet yellow, topped both lists. She wasn't a bad worker. That's the trick. She knew how to move projects just fast enough to get credit and dodge accountability, but she left bruises, cultural ones, the kind that don't show up in quarterly reports but metastasize over time. The board gave me full discretion. I made the call. I didn't do it because she insulted me. Not directly, not just that. I did it because people like her make companies bleed slowly from the inside. I've seen it too many times. Departments decaying under ego, talent walking out the door, trust eroded by sarcasm disguised as leadership. She thought leadership was dominance, but dominance without restraint is just noise, and noise ruins signal. I sent Mr. Whitaker a 1-line email the night before. "Deliver it clean, don't gloat," he replied. "Of course." Outside, a bluebird landed on the edge of the porch. I watched it peck once at the railing, then fly off. Simple, decisive, gone. That's how I wanted this to be. No anger, no retribution, just balance being restored. She was going to step into the biggest celebration of her life. She'd feel adored, admired, safe. And then a man she worshipped would speak 5 words that would detonate the illusion she'd built her entire career on. And only 2 people in that room would know it was coming. By the time the string quartet hit their 3rd round of Canon in D, my face was frozen in that half smile people use when pretending they're having a good time. The reception was a full-blown performance, flower walls, live artists painting the couple mid-dance, LED initials floating in the koi pond outside. A curated fantasy, staged perfectly for social media, right down to the hashtag printed on cocktail napkins, granting forever. She floated through the crowd like she owned the air, the new bride, hair sculpted into a shape the wind couldn't touch, dress fitted so tightly you could probably bounce coins off the seams, and in the glow of her moment, she couldn't help herself. The mic was inevitable. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she began, holding her champagne like a trophy, "especially those of you who helped make today possible, my amazing team at Lankwell and Grant, and of course, the man who's taught me everything I know about rising in a world that doesn't always value bold women, Mr. Whitaker." Polite applause. Her eyes sparkled. "And to my family," she paused for effect, then tilted her head toward me without looking directly. "Thank you for your interesting contributions. I guess sometimes you need to see what not to do in life to really learn how to lead, right?" A ripple of laughter, tense, measured, not as full as she wanted. Her parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Her husband smiled too long, then glanced quickly around to see if it was safe. My wife looked down at her glass. I kept still. She continued piling the sugar on the bitterness. "Some people take risks, some people play it safe. Some of us actually build something. Others, well, enjoy the cake." Another chuckle. One person clapped. It was her. That was the moment Whitaker stood. The crowd responded like he was the best man, the groom, and a rock star all rolled into one. People straightened their posture. The waitstaff paused mid-pour. He lifted his glass with practiced ease. "Before I toast," he said, voice calm and clear, "I'd like a word with the bride." She blinked, laughed lightly. "Oh, now?" "Yes," he said, already walking toward the side exit, motioning with 2 fingers. She followed, still smiling but stiff now, like she wasn't sure if this was a surprise praise session or a private critique. The second they left, the air changed. You could feel the room inhale. Chatter dropped to murmurs. Someone whispered, Is that normal? Another said, maybe he's giving her a bonus? A third, bless the innocents, asked, are they sleeping together? I just watched the doorway they exited through, waited, let the suspense climb the walls like ivy. The doors opened exactly 8 minutes later. She walked out first, but not the same way she walked in. The veil was still pinned perfectly, her posture still tall, but the expression, that had changed. It was brittle now, like a porcelain smile trying to survive a thunderstorm. You could see it in the way her hands clutched each other, white-knuckled, and suddenly unsure where to rest. Whitaker followed, not angry, not smug, just composed, like a surgeon exiting the OR. The room, sensing something off-kilter, hushed. Conversation thinned into ambient noise. Forks paused midair. Even the quartet missed their cue. He approached the front of the room again, glass still in hand. He looked at her once, flat, unreadable, then turned to face the rest of the wedding guests. A nod toward me, then he turned to her. You're fired. The words didn't echo. They detonated. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air held its breath. Then, clink, the sound of a dessert fork falling onto a charger plate. One guest coughed in disbelief. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" She blinked. Once, twice. "Excuse me?" she said, voice paper thin. "What the hell are you talking about?" Whitaker didn't flinch. "Your contract was reviewed this quarter. The board made its decision last week. I waited until after your wedding ceremony out of courtesy. I informed you just now, privately, to preserve dignity. You chose to return to the room." Her mouth opened, no words, just a stunned inhale like the air itself had betrayed her. I've been leading key initiatives," she stammered. "You said I was essential. I said you were visible," he corrected. "Not the same thing." People started shifting in their chairs. The wedding planner froze by the cake table, unsure if she should signal the DJ or call security. Her husband looked like someone had just whispered run in his ear. "You can't do this here," she said, louder now, panic crawling up her throat. "This is my wedding." Whitaker simply turned to the crowd. "Apologies for the disruption. Please continue enjoying the evening. Champagne is on me." And then he walked off, calm, controlled, leaving her standing there in a white dress that suddenly felt like a costume. I didn't move, just met her eyes from across the room. No smirk, no triumph, just quiet acknowledgement, the kind you give someone when the storm they mocked finally turns its teeth on them. The room didn't erupt, it sank, like the collective gravity had shifted and no one could quite stand upright anymore. Laughter died so fast it felt post-mortem. Guests froze mid-toast, mid-bite, mid-smile. The string quartet fumbled into silence like their instruments had been muted by God himself. People didn't speak. They whispered. "Did he just fire her? Is that allowed? Wait, why here?" She stood in the center of it all, still clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline, eyes wide and watering. Not from tears, not yet, but from sheer, unfiltered disbelief. She turned toward the crowd, arms slightly out, searching for traction. "You can't fire me here," she half laughed, half screeched. "This is my wedding." Whitaker stopped, right before he vanished behind the catering archway, turned around, no sigh, no drama, just the weary patience of a man who's had this conversation before, with executives, with lawyers, with prideful casualties of their own unchecked ambition. "This was the only time we'd both be present," he said simply. "And I wanted to honor the man who helped us make the call." Then with a slight incline of his head, he gestured to me. And the world shifted. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every chair turned like synchronized clockwork. Forks lowered. Glasses froze mid-sip. And suddenly, I was no longer the nobody in the charcoal suit tucked away at the family table. I wasn't the brother-in-law or the between-things guy or the punchline in her speech. I was the storm. But I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't smile like a movie villain with a cigar and a monologue. I gave a small, measured nod, polite, almost apologetic. She looked at me, blinking so hard it looked like static. Her lips parted to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Not a syllable. But because this wasn't just the end of a job. It was the end of her illusion. Her parents stared at me, like they were seeing me for the first time. Her mother's hand moved to her pearls, which told me everything I needed to know about her internal processing speed. Her father just blinked, slow, calculated, like he was realizing how many warnings he'd missed. And my wife, God, my wife, she didn't look smug. She didn't smirk. She didn't even look away. She just gave me this look, like she understood. And maybe for the first time, her silence wasn't permission. It was approval. She whispered something, just for me, across the room. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the shape of it on her lips. Thank you. Her sister tried one last swing. You did this. She spat across the floor, jabbing a finger at me like it was a sword. You set this up. You orchestrated this to ruin my day. I tilted my head, gave her nothing, not even the satisfaction of denial. Because when someone's busy writing your obituary, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is hand them a pen. Weddings usually end in a crescendo, clinking glasses, champagne-drenched hugs, off-key singing on the dance floor as someone's aunt slow dances with a waiter. This one ended in whispers and early goodbyes. Guests trickled out like they were escaping a crime scene. No bouquet toss, no cake-cutting spectacle, just heels clacking briskly on marble, eyes cast down, polite nods and thank you. It was lovely, mumbled, as if trying to outrun the secondhand embarrassment. The photographer packed up without direction. No one asked for group shots anymore. The DJ played one more upbeat track, saw no one moved, then slowly faded it out and didn't start another. Her husband, barely a husband by the timeline of vows, stood near the bar, hands in pockets, watching her from a distance. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not sympathy, just distance. Like he'd suddenly realized he married a stranger in a very expensive dress. She paced, small, frantic circles in heels she hadn't broken in, muttering to no one and everyone. Where is he? Where did he go? She snapped at the planner. Mr. Whitaker? He left after the announcement, the planner said cautiously. Didn't say where. She turned to her parents like reinforcements might arrive. Mom, Dad, say something. He just ruined everything. He ambushed me. Her mother gave a nervous laugh and said, Well, sweetie, maybe now's not the time to. And we're just letting this happen, she cut in. Her father looked like he'd aged 10 years since lunch. He reached out a hand, maybe to console, maybe to stop her from further self-immolation, but didn't speak, just gently guided her elbow toward a chair. They didn't defend her. They didn't scold her either. They were in the same boat as everyone else now, just spectators of her unraveling. She kept demanding reasons, demanding the moment to be reversed, like it was a bad rehearsal, not the real show. Then her sister, my wife, finally stepped forward, calm, clear, unshaken. You brought this on yourself, she said, quiet enough to cut through everything. And for once, her sister didn't fire back. She blinked, her mouth open. Nothing came. Because deep down, somewhere under all the bravado and buzzwords, she knew, not just what had happened, but why. The ego, the jabs, the click of her fingers at staff, the thinly veiled contempt for people who didn't orbit her. She built a throne out of other people's silence and was stunned when someone finally stood up and kicked the legs out. She sat down on the edge of the dance floor like gravity had suddenly remembered her name. Her veil slid off one shoulder, limp and forgotten. Someone turned off the lights above the tables. The soft thud of folding chairs echoed. She sat there alone, veil in her lap, staring out at the half-eaten cake and half-drunk flutes and half-believed illusion she'd constructed, and realized maybe for the first time in her curated, algorithm-approved life, power isn't volume. It's who's still standing when the music stops. The house was quiet when we got home. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that lets you finally breathe after holding it for hours. My wife kicked off her shoes near the door and didn't say anything at first. She didn't have to. We moved like people who'd just left a battlefield and were still waiting to see if the dust would settle or rise again. I hung my jacket on the back of the chair, loosened the knot in my tie, and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass. I didn't even feel like finishing. I just needed the weight of it in my hand. She came into the kitchen, barefoot now, mascara faintly smudged, her hair already twisted into a messy knot like she'd shed the last of the wedding along with the silence. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. That was quiet, she said. Then after a pause, but loud. I nodded. nodded. She looked at me, not searching for answers, just making sure I was still here, still me. You didn't enjoy it, did you? I shook my head. It wasn't about enjoying it. She nodded, understanding before I could even finish the thought. It was about stopping it. She didn't say anything after that, just stood there with me for a while, in a kitchen lit only by a tired lamp and the sound of the refrigerator humming like it was part of the conversation. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the board. Formal offer, compensation package attached, seat on the strategy committee, titles, voting privileges, golden handshakes, all the shiny toys they reserve for the ones they trust most. I declined. A short reply, one line. I did what needed doing, that's enough. No hard feelings. Just closure. There's a kind of satisfaction that doesn't need applause. No LinkedIn announcement, no long posts about lessons learned, no moral grandstanding, just knowing something toxic isn't steering the ship anymore, that someone finally said, enough. Some nights I think about her face in that moment, when she realized the story she told herself about power didn't match reality, that power isn't about who holds the mic, it's about who writes the script. And I changed the ending. Later that evening, I stepped out into the backyard. The sun was gone, but the heat still hung in the air. The garden smelled like mint and basil, overgrown, unruly, but real. I walked the path we'd laid with our own hands, one stone at a time. Through the kitchen window, I could hear laughter, my wife's, then one of the kids, bubbling up behind hers, like a chorus, no speeches, no audience, just home. And I realized I didn't need anyone to know what I'd done. She knew, he knew, and most importantly, she knew. That was the victory. Not loud, not dramatic, just permanent.